playing. I'd like to have you demonstrate some special effects.
Sure.
And you can choose whichever one you want to do.
I'm a violist, so I'm going to stick with
All
the
right.
viola.
The first effect I'd like you to show my students is the use of vibrato.
Okay. Vibrato is basically the modulation of pitch to create some sort of musical, even emotional effect. Vibrato can be used with the finger alone, with the wrist, or even with the whole arm. But most of the time it's used with the wrist. So when you have a note, you want to give it some color. And people always think that, oh, that makes it sound so beautiful. Well, you know, sometimes contemporary composers especially use vibrato to create the opposite, to create tension. We have that as well.
Okay. What about this is a favorite of mine, pizzicato.
Pizzicato. We do come from a family related to the lute instruments. Yeah, this is a new thing that I've noticed that more people are doing, that you use the thumb instead of the first finger. It's a fairly new development. And another thing is that the best place to pizzicato is directly in the middle of the resonating string. So if we press the string down, the amount that's resonating is shorter. That's how we create differences of pitch. So it's actually better than, yeah, so that's part of that as well. I'll just mention Bartok pizzicato is when we have that as well. We don't do it very often.
Yeah, that's a more modern technique.
It's a more modern technique.
What about the tremolo?
The tremolo is when we use, if we use our whole arm and try to make very fast notes, we get tired very fast. That's why we've got to use smaller parts of our bowing apparatus to create that kind of sound.
And tremolo in music is used a lot of times to create tension and suspense.
Correct. What shall we do? Yeah.
All right, what about a trill? Show us a trill. Good. Trills are used mainly for just decorative purposes.
Yes, yes.
And show us what a mute is and what it does.
Yeah. We're talking about mutes. The various kinds of mutes. The most common one is a piece of rubber that we've got one here that looks like it's shaped like the instrument. Actually, it's cute. We put it over here. Now, mutes, surprisingly enough, are not intended to reduce the amount of sound. It does that as well as a side effect, but the point of it is to change the color of the sound. Mute. And I'm not really changing the way I play, it's that the instrument sounds right.
For someone like me, it appears to be slightly softer. So someone might be, who is not really as familiar with that would possibly describe it as slightly softer.
Yes.
But it's not really softer. It's more
it's more hidden, I would say.
more hidden or covered sounding.
Correct. I mean, we're looking at this entirely out of context, of course. When we actually see how it is used in the middle of a piece, if it is, it's rare that you have an entire piece that's muted. Usually you put it on, you take it off, and then you hear very different sounds that are produced in the use of that in the composition. This is a more traditional mute, little sort of hair clip, as it were, goes around top, clips. And remember, the mutes basically mute the bridge, which causes the change of sound throughout. So a more wooden kind of sound. Yeah, and we have two other mutes here which are used not for performance purposes, but just so that your neighbor doesn't kill you when you practice at 3 o'clock in the morning. We have a rubber mute here, a 5-prong mute. It goes entirely across. Not really as effective as a big piece of metal that will prevent your instrument from making much sound at all.
Wow.
Yes.
Well, that's a dramatic change.
When you have a 5-prong metal mute, which I actually have for the viola, you really can practice at 3 o'clock in the morning and not wake up your next door neighbor. It's so quiet. Unfortunately, the pitch is so nasal that it gives you a headache after.
All right. Show us what a glissando sounds like.
Back to the viola. That's the nice thing. People look at this and say, "How can you play the violin and the viola? You have no frets." One of the good things that we can do is we can gliss, and a gliss is sometimes downwards and upwards or downwards in pitch. My favorite is the sound of a truck passing on the highway. A lot of times we do half a glissando when we shift, we move up here. Instead of, sometimes we do it, it's just slight sort of
an expressive,
yes,
romantic.
yeah.
Okay. And the last thing on my list of things to show is the double stop.
Double stop. I'm going to show how that can be. Double stop is when you stop more than one string, so you're playing more than one string at a time. They apply to 2, 3, or even 4 strings, even though some people call them triple stops or quadruple stops, but I think they all fall under the category of double stops.
And you're producing more than one pitch at the same time.
Correct, we are. That's not so easy considering that the bridge is curved, right? So usually you can only play 2 strings at once. But if you press down hard enough on the middle string, you can actually be able to get 3 strings at once. But it requires some force to be able to get over there. If it's 4 notes, usually you have to split them, or depending on how fast you want to break the sound. So there are many ways to play the same example I did before. If we play them individually, that's individually. Now if I play them as double stops, if you're wondering where the example comes from, it's not from classical music, it's from the movie Master and Commander, starring Russell Crowe. Yes, when he pretended to play the violin, and I can tell you, he pretended to play the violin with the cello duo, some beautiful pieces of music.
Yes, I've seen the movie, and it's a good nice music. Those are all the questions I have.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much for coming.